Have you ever wondered what happens when a man makes a deal with the devil? What if you were given the chance to change your fate with a single promise? In the scorched fields of Mabwe, one desperate farmer faced that exact choice. For a bountiful harvest, he sold his soul to a mysterious stranger who appeared in the shadows. But what he didn't realize was that some bargains come with a price far steeper than wealth. Tonight, we unveiled the story of a man who learned too late. The devil always collects his due. Tonight, you'll journey through an incredible tale of temptation, regret, and the unforeseen consequences of making deals with forces beyond our understanding. As Thomas, a simple farmer, bargains for a prosperous harvest, you'll witness shocking twists and revelations that will challenge everything you thought you knew about fate. At the heart of this story stands a mysterious figure, one who offers a solution to Thomas's struggles, but whose true nature remains hidden until it's too late. Brace yourself for a story where greed and desperation blur the lines between survival and damnation. In the heart of Mabwe village, under the unrelenting heat of the African sun, lies a field that once promised hope. Now, it only echoes with silence. The soil is cracked, parched, and dry, just like the spirit of Thomas, the farmer who calls this place home. His face, weathered by years of labor, is etched with the deep lines of struggle. Every morning, he rises with the sun, his body worn from endless work, his mind weighed down by thoughts of failure. Yet, the stubborn hope of a man who refuses to give up burns within him. Thomas's farm was once a thriving paradise, brimming with lush crops that fed not only his family, but the entire village. The laughter of children, the hum of busy hands in the fields, it all seemed like a distant memory now. For years, the rains had failed to come, and every crop planted turned to dust. The village that once thrived with color and life now lay in ruins. His family, his wife and 2 children, look to him for answers, yet he has none. The weight of their hunger, their pain, rests squarely on his shoulders. Thomas isn't just a farmer, he's a father, a husband, and a man burdened by the crushing fear of losing everything. He dreams of the harvests he once had, the bounty that would feed his family and restore his dignity. But as time passes, desperation begins to creep in. The pressure to provide, to save his land, to protect the people he loves, is unbearable. It's not just the crops that he fears will wither, it's his very identity. His place in the world, slipping away with every failed season. Little does Thomas know, the answer he seeks is about to arrive in a form far darker than he could ever imagine. The soil beneath his feet has become his prison, and in his desperation, he may find himself trading not just his crops, but his very soul for salvation. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows over the fields of Mabwe, as the dust settled, thick and heavy in the still air. Thomas stood in the center of his barren land, his hands trembling slightly as they gripped the edges of his straw hat. He had been working tirelessly all day, but nothing had changed. His crops were still withered, his fields still empty. The land was as hungry as his family, starved for the rains that had failed to come for years. The despair in his heart was palpable, every day more suffocating than the last. He knew it wouldn't be long before the village would give up on him, just as he had begun to give up on himself. His neighbors had already moved on, seeking better prospects in other parts of the country, leaving him behind in this desolate place. Only his wife Amina and their 2 children remained, though their eyes were filled with the same sadness and uncertainty that haunted his every step. That evening, after his children had gone to sleep, Thomas sat outside his modest hut, the weight of the world pressing on his shoulders. The air was thick with the scent of dust and the distant smoke from a fire that someone in the village had lit, a beacon of warmth in the otherwise cold, silent night. He couldn't help but think of the dreams he once had, the dreams of a bountiful harvest, of providing for his family, of securing their future. All of it seemed like a distant fantasy now. What if I could just fix it all? He whispered to himself, almost as though speaking aloud would make the thought real. What if there was a way out? Little did he know, the answer to that question would come to him in the most unexpected of ways, and when it did, it would come with a price far steeper than he could ever imagine. The next day, as the sun rose in the east, Thomas was in the field again, though his heart wasn't in it. The same barren soil, the same hopeless task. His hands moved mechanically, plucking at the dry, lifeless stalks of crops that had been long since dead. His mind was elsewhere, lost in thoughts of what might be. The idea of leaving had crossed his mind, but there was nowhere to go, no work to be found, no hope beyond the dirt beneath his feet. That was when he saw him, the stranger who had appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. One moment, Thomas was standing alone in his field, his face lifted to the sky, searching for something to hold onto. And the next, a tall figure appeared before him. The man was impeccably dressed in a black suit, a crisp white shirt, and shiny leather boots that reflected the faint rays of the morning sun. He seemed out of place in the heat and dust, his presence almost unnatural in the barren landscape. The man's eyes were sharp, piercing, and his smile was both calm and unsettling. He didn't speak right away, just stood there, watching Thomas, with an intensity that sent a chill through his spine. Thomas, startled by the sudden appearance of this stranger, took a step back. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The man's smile widened. "That is a question I asked very few people, but for you, I will make an exception. I am someone who can offer you a solution, a way out of this." His voice was smooth, like velvet, and yet it carried an unmistakable weight, one that immediately grabbed Thomas's attention. Thomas didn't know how to respond. He had heard stories of strangers who came offering help, but they were always the ones who took the most in return. Yet, there was something compelling about this man, something magnetic in his presence that made it hard for Thomas to look away. "How can you help me?" Thomas asked, his voice barely a whisper, as though he was afraid to speak the words aloud. The stranger took a few steps closer, his boots making no sound against the dry ground. "I know what you seek," he said, his gaze never leaving Thomas's. "A bountiful harvest, a way to feed your family, a way to restore your land, a way to make it all right again." Thomas swallowed hard. His heart quickened, and his mind raced. Could this man truly help him? Could he bring the rains, bring life back to his crops? "I can offer you that," the stranger continued, "but not for free, of course. Nothing in life comes without a price. And I believe you, Thomas, are ready to make that trade." Thomas's pulse raced in his ears as he struggled to process the words. What kind of trade are you talking about?" The stranger's smile never faltered. "A simple one. You offer me what I need, and I will give you everything you desire. In return, a harvest beyond your wildest dreams. A bounty that will last for years. Your land will flourish again, and you will be known as the wealthiest man in the village." "But what do you need from me?" Thomas asked, his voice trembling now, a bead of sweat rolling down his forehead. The stranger paused, his eyes narrowing. "What I need, Thomas, is a simple thing. It's your soul. You give me your soul, and in return, I will give you everything you desire." For a moment, Thomas stood there, stunned by the man's words. He had heard of such things before, dark whispers, of deals made with demons, of lives traded for power and riches, but those were just stories, legends meant to scare children. Surely, this man was just offering a false hope. But then he thought of his children, of Amina, the look in their eyes when they saw the hunger in his own, the desperation in their voices when they asked for food. Could he really turn his back on them? Could he watch them starve? Or worse, could they leave him behind, just as the others had? "What do I have to do?" Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if the words themselves were forbidden. The stranger's smile grew wider, but his eyes were sharp, cold like the tip of a dagger. "All you need to do is sign a simple mark, and I will give you everything you've ever dreamed of." Thomas hesitated. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him, but his mind was clouded with fear, with desperation. The choice before him seemed impossible, but the promise of a harvest, of success, of a future for his family, was too great to ignore. The stranger reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn piece of parchment and a quill. He placed both in Thomas's hands. "Make your mark," he said, his voice low, almost coaxing. Thomas stared at the parchment, his heart racing in his chest. His fingers trembled as he looked from the stranger's eyes to the quill in his hand. This was it, the decision that would change everything. But what he didn't realize was that the devil never asked for the soul all at once. No, he lets you think you're making a choice, lets you believe that the bargain is fair, but in the end, you'll find that you've given everything, and the price will be far steeper than you ever imagined. Thomas dipped the quill into the ink and, with trembling hands, signed his name. And as the ink dried, he felt a cold shiver run down his spine, as if the very earth beneath him had changed. He didn't know it yet, but he had just signed away his life. The following days felt like a blur for Thomas. The weight of his decision gnawed at him constantly. The stranger's words echoed in his mind, filling him with a mixture of dread and anticipation. He had traded his soul for a single harvest, for wealth beyond measure. But every moment since that fateful signing felt more like a curse than a blessing. The night after the deal, he lay awake in his small, modest hut, the sound of the wind whipping through the cracks in the walls, the only thing keeping him company. Amina slept beside him, unaware of the pact he had just made. He couldn't bring himself to tell her, couldn't bear the thought of sharing the dark secret that now sat heavy in his heart. His conscience screamed at him, but the vision of a lush, thriving field, his field kept him awake. He had made the choice, and there was no turning back now. At dawn, when the first rays of the sun cracked through the horizon, Thomas rose. His feet seemed heavier than usual as he walked to his field. There, in the distance, he could already see the change. The soil, once cracked and barren, had begun to darken with moisture, and the air felt charged electric. Somehow, but something wasn't right. The sight was almost too perfect, too immediate. The promise of the harvest had come fast. But the feeling that something was wrong tugged at the edges of his mind. As he approached the land, his heart raced. His hands shook slightly as he reached down to touch the soil. The ground beneath his fingers felt soft, yielding almost alive. It was as if the earth itself was responding to him, welcoming him back with a vigor he hadn't felt in years. The plants, which had been mere stalks and stumps the day before, were now lush with green, heavy with fruit and grain. They flourished unnaturally fast, almost as if they were growing before his very eyes. For a moment, Thomas stood in awe. The promise of the devil had been fulfilled. His field, his crops, his future all, were restored in the blink of an eye. The sight of the abundance brought tears to his eyes, but a deep, unsettling feeling lingered in his chest. Could it really be this easy? Was there a cost to this miraculous bounty that he hadn't yet seen? Days passed, and the harvest continued to thrive. It was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. The grains were more golden than any Thomas had known. The fruits ripened to perfection. Neighbors, hearing of the sudden change in his fortune, came from far and wide to witness the miracle for themselves. They marveled at the sight of the thriving field, their whispers filled with awe and disbelief. Yet, as the days turned to weeks, the changes in Thomas became harder to ignore. The glow of prosperity that had once filled him now began to fade. He was no longer the man who once laughed with his family, worked with joy, and cherished the simple pleasures of life. Now, he was distant, his eyes hollow, his gaze far away. He spent more and more time in the field, inspecting the crops, touching the soil, almost as if he were trying to find something, or perhaps, avoid something. Amina noticed the shift. Her once bright, loving husband was becoming a shadow of the man she had married. He no longer laughed at the jokes of their children, no longer shared the quiet moments they had enjoyed together. His mind seemed elsewhere, always focused on the field, always consumed by something beyond her understanding. One evening, as the sun began to set, Amina confronted him. She stood in the doorway of their hut, her eyes filled with concern. "Thomas, what's happening to you?" she asked, her voice breaking the silence that had fallen over them both. "You're not the same. You've changed." Thomas paused, his back turned to her. He didn't know how to answer her. How could he explain the terrible deal he had made, the price he had already paid, without even realizing it? "I'm fine, Amina," he said, his voice flat, lacking the warmth it once had. He turned to face her, but his eyes were distant, unfocused. Everything is fine. But everything was not fine. The more Thomas immersed himself in the harvest, the more he began to notice strange occurrences, small things at first, things that he could dismiss as coincidences. The crops grew far too quickly, as though they were being forced to grow at unnatural speeds. The soil seemed to change under his touch, feeling colder, less alive with each passing day. The air, too, had begun to shift. The winds that blew through the field carried an odd chill with them, a whispering hum that seemed to speak directly to his soul. One evening, while walking through the rows of grain, Thomas felt it again, the pull of something dark, something ancient, just beyond his reach. The feeling of being watched. The field, once a place of hope and life, had begun to feel like a prison. His every step seemed to echo with a strange resonance, a reminder of the deal he had made. The weight of his choice settled deeper into his bones, and the truth that he had avoided confronting for so long now became undeniable. The devil's payment was coming, and it would be far worse than he ever imagined. His sleep was restless. Each night, he was haunted by vivid dreams. In them, the field stretched endlessly before him, but the crops that once flourished now twisted, their roots creeping and sprawling like snakes, dark tendrils reaching for him. The sky above was a deep crimson, and the wind howled with a voice that sounded eerily like the stranger who had made the bargain with him. The dream always ended the same way. The devil's face, grinning wide and cruel, standing in the center of the field, waiting. Thomas awoke with a start, his heart pounding, his breath ragged. The morning light filtered through the cracks in the walls, casting long shadows on the floor. But as he rose to his feet, something caught his eye, something small but strange. A black feather, resting on the doorstep of his hut. It was out of place, a stark contrast against the dirt and dust of the village. He reached down to touch it, and the moment his fingers made contact, a jolt of cold ran through his body. A shiver that seemed to pierce through him. The feather was no ordinary feather. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. It shimmered in the sunlight, its edges almost iridescent, and as he held it, he felt an inexplicable sense of dread wash over him. Little did he realize. This feather was the first sign of the devil's true payment. It was a mark, a reminder that the contract was not yet complete. The price would be paid, and Thomas would soon find out just how steep that price truly was. He knew something was wrong. He could feel it, deep in his gut. The field was no longer just a symbol of his success, was the prison that would hold him forever. And the cost of his greed was just beginning to reveal itself. The next day, a heavy storm rolled in, dark clouds swirling above the village like a gathering storm. The wind picked up, howling through the trees. And for the first time in weeks, Thomas felt a sense of urgency. The air seemed to crackle with the same tension he had felt the moment he signed the pact. As he stood in his field, watching the storm approach, he realized that the harvest, this unnatural bounty, had come with a cost far beyond anything he could have imagined. What would it take to undo the damage he had done? What had he truly traded for this prosperity? These questions lingered, unanswered, as the storm raged on, closing in on his fate. The harvest had arrived, but it was not the blessing it seemed. It was only the beginning of a far darker journey. The devil had come to collect, and Thomas was now fully aware that there would be no escaping the consequences of his bargain. Thomas stood in the middle of his field, the storm now looming ominously overhead. The air was thick with tension, crackling with energy, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Dark clouds twisted above him, swirling in unnatural patterns, and a cold wind whipped through the crops, bending the golden stalks in strange, almost unnatural ways. It was as though nature itself had turned against him, and Thomas felt it deep in his bones. He could no longer deny it. The field, once a symbol of hope, had become a prison, a dark, twisted reflection of his own soul. He had traded his future for prosperity, but now, standing there in the midst of this storm, he realized what he had truly lost: the warmth of his family, his peace of mind, and, most devastatingly, his own humanity. The feather that had appeared on his doorstep just days ago had been only the beginning. Strange things had continued to happen, shadows that lingered a little too long in the corners of his vision. Whispers in the wind that seemed to call his name, and an unshakable feeling of being watched, followed. Every day, the harvest grew, more abundant, but so did the creeping sense that something was wrong, terribly wrong. Amina had grown more distant, too. She had tried, in vain, to reach him, to talk to him, but Thomas had become a stranger in his own home. He could see the fear in her eyes, the concern in the way she watched him, as if she knew something was deeply wrong, but couldn't quite put it into words. And the children, his children, had begun to change as well. They no longer ran to greet him when he came home. Their faces were shadowed with a quiet sadness that he couldn't explain. But today, as the storm gathered around him, Thomas couldn't ignore the inevitable any longer. His feet felt rooted to the ground, and his heart pounded in his chest, as if someone was pulling him deeper into the field, deeper into the darkness that had started to take root inside him. He glanced over at the towering crops, their golden heads swaying in the wind, shimmering in the unnatural light, and his pulse quickened. Suddenly, there was a crack, a sharp, violent sound that split the air. Thomas flinched, his head snapping, toward the source of the noise. A massive branch from one of the nearby trees had been torn from its trunk, the wind violently tearing through the field. But this wasn't the storm, not entirely. There was something more to it, something that felt intentional. A deep, rumbling laugh broke through the howling winds. Thomas froze, his breath caught in his throat. He knew that laugh. It was the same laugh he had heard in his dreams, the same laugh that had haunted him in the dead of night. He slowly turned, his eyes searching the shadowed expanse of the field, his heart hammering in his chest. There, standing in the center of the field, his figure outlined against the dark sky, was the stranger, the devil himself, smiling that same, knowing smile. His eyes gleamed with a cold, unnatural light, and his presence seemed to warp the very air around him. He was no longer just a man, he was something far darker, something more insidious. "Thomas," the devil called, his voice smooth and filled with that same unsettling calm. "You've done well. The harvest is thriving, just as promised. But do you know what comes next?" Thomas's mouth went dry. His legs felt weak beneath him, but he stood tall, his gaze fixed on the devil, refusing to show the terror that gripped him. "What have you done to me?" he asked, his voice hoarse, his throat tight. "What have you done to my family?" The devil's smile widened, his teeth gleaming like sharpened ivory. "Done to you. I've given you what you wanted, Thomas. Wealth, power, prosperity. What more could you ask for?" Thomas's eyes burned with a mix of rage and fear. "My family is falling apart," he said, his voice cracking. "I don't recognize myself anymore. You've taken everything from me." The devil's laugh echoed again, a deep, hollow sound that made Thomas's skin crawl. "Oh, Thomas, you've taken everything from yourself. I merely showed you the door. You opened it. You signed the contract." Thomas's chest tightened. His mind reeled as the truth began to sink in. Made the choice. He had traded everything for the harvest, for the promise of success. The devil had offered him a way out of his misery, but at what cost? The price had been his soul, but it wasn't just his soul, it was his life, his family, and everything he had ever cared about. "I didn't know," Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind. "I didn't know what I was giving up." The devil stepped forward, his presence growing more overwhelming with each step. "You knew, Thomas. Deep down, you knew. Everyone knows that a deal with the devil comes with a cost. But you were desperate. Desperate enough to ignore the warnings. Desperate enough to think that you could outsmart me." Thomas's breath hitched. The words stung, but they were true. He had been desperate. He had been willing to do anything to save his family, to fix everything that had gone wrong. But now, the consequences were clear. There was no escaping the price he had paid. "Please," Thomas begged, falling to his knees in the dirt, his hands clutching the soil beneath him. "I'll do anything. Take it all back. Take the harvest. Take the wealth, just let me go. Let me have my life back." The devil's eyes glinted with amusement as he crouched down beside Thomas, his face inches from his. "It's too late for that, Thomas. You've already made your choice. You've already sealed your fate." Thomas's mind raced, his heart racing in his chest. He felt a cold, icy chill creep over him, as though the very air around him had turned to ice. The world seemed to narrow, the wind howling louder, the crops around him bending unnaturally toward him, as if the very earth was rejecting him. "Please," Thomas whispered again, his voice breaking. I didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing." The devil leaned in closer, his breath cold against Thomas's face. "You didn't know. You didn't think that there would be a price for such a deal. There's always a price, Thomas. You just thought you could cheat the system." Thomas's eyes blurred with tears as the reality of his situation finally hit him. He had lost everything: his soul, his family, his happiness. All for a single harvest, a single moment of fleeting success. And now, he understood. He had not been given a gift. He had been tricked. He had been used. The devil stood up, his figure towering over Thomas as he extended his hand, the shadows swirling around him. "You wanted the harvest, Thomas. You got it. But now, the harvest comes for you. And it will take everything. There is no going back. There is no escape." The storm raged overhead, and the crops seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. Their once vibrant golden hues, now darkening to a sickly red. Thomas's heart dropped as he realized the full extent of his bargain. The harvest wasn't just the bounty he had wanted. It was the beginning of the end. As the devil turned and began to walk away, the ground beneath Thomas's feet seemed to shift, and the wind howled louder. His eyes widened in terror, and he realized, in that moment, that he had crossed the point of no return. There was no way to undo what had been done. There was no way to escape the hell he had just signed up for. The harvest had come, but it would come for him as well, and he would be left with nothing but the consequences of his greed. The storm continued to howl, and Thomas could only watch as the devil disappeared into the shadows of his own creation, leaving Thomas alone in a field of cursed prosperity. The days that followed were marked by a suffocating silence. Thomas no longer saw his family as he once did. Amina's eyes had lost their warmth, and the children, once full of life, were now mere shadows of their former selves. They had all become prisoners to the harvest, the curse that he had unknowingly embraced. The village, once filled with whispers of awe and admiration for Thomas's wealth, now turned cold. people no longer came to his fields with wonder. Instead, they avoided his eyes, sensing the darkness that had followed him back. The crops, though bountiful, had begun to rot from within. The once golden grain now looked sickly, twisted, as if the land itself had started to turn against him. But Thomas knew it was too late. The devil had collected his doom more than his soul. It had taken everything: his peace, his family, and the very essence of who he was. He had sought a shortcut to survival, to escape his desperate situation, but in doing so, had sealed his fate. The lesson was clear: no matter how tempting, no bargain with the devil can end in anything but ruin. His greed, his desperation, had led him into an irreversible abyss. Now, standing amidst the wreckage of his own choices, Thomas understood: some deals are too costly to ever undo. Thanks for watching till the end. If this story gave you goosebumps, give it a like and make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment below and let me know which country or city you are watching from. I read everyone. Till then, take care, folks.